Once upon a time, there was a preterite, a tense in the Hebrew verbal system. And it went out for a drive one windy, dark evening when the moon was full, but clouds were skittering across its surface. And then he made a turn toward an old house abandoned for many generations, but still standing for some mysterious reason. And Preterite was lost. Or so it is said, because many of his children, if they can be called children, came pouring forth from this house and polluting the purity of the Hebrew verbal system with something called apocated forms, and so on and so forth. And so it goes. Something silly like that. There used to be in Proto-Semitic, or at least in something before what we call biblical Hebrew, there used to be something called the past tense, preterite. And, well, it got lost, but there are vestiges of it still remaining. And that's the point here. There's some good news and some bad news. To tell a story in Hebrew, you use the imperfect. Doesn't make much sense, because isn't the imperfect the future tense? No, I've been saying to you the imperfect is not the future tense, it's the modal. But we learn it as a future tense to distinguish it for the first 7 chapters so that we can do the exercises in this book, see? The past tense is not the perfect, but we use the perfect as the past tense in order to do the exercises in the book. The perfect is far more complex than that, as is written in the book here and as I've been saying to you. So in order to tell a story, narrative, you use something called the waw-consecutive, the imperfect waw-consecutive to be precise. Now, in the book, you will see quite clearly the historical background and all that kind of stuff. But the idea is essentially you've got to tell a story. So the king killed the servant. The servant rose from the dead. The wife of the servant rejoiced. The people were angry at the king, and so on and so forth. That's all past tense, simple past tense, as opposed to the king had a habit of killing his servants. That's not narrative anymore. That might be in a narrative, but that's not narrative. That's some sort of progressive, which you would use the imperfect for, not the imperfect waw-consecutive. So a lot of jimble jamble and wobble wobble coming out of my mouth right now. Let's just take a look at it, shall we? I've got to put on my glasses so I can see what I'm doing. Okay, so yeah, there's the historical stuff again. Masoret reads are going to help you out. You can read that on your own, but here's how it works. There's going to be this overlap, and what has happened in short, right, is that there is a preterite. And for most verbs, that preterite form was lost or got elided or, mangled along the way. And what happened was they decided to use this waw plus doubling, waw, patak, and then double the preform, yod or tet or aleph or nun, right? And that's why it's called a waw-consecutive. And there's some debate about what you should have it, what you should call it, and all that kind of stuff, because there's a debate about what the Masoretes are trying to get across to you. There are preterite forms that are still left, right? And you'll see those in just a minute. We call them apocated forms. Surprise, surprise, they're the 2 consonant roots and a handful of other things. And they overlap in form. And so you'll have just your basic yiktol, va-yiktol, as you see in example 1 there. There's nothing different about it except that it has a waw plus a patak plus a yod, doubled yod, right? But when we get to the apocated forms, they actually will show a preterite, but it will also have a waw plus a patak plus the doubled preform. So it's easy enough. You take yiktol, tiktol, 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 yaktol, and you run it down. And of course, as you see in example 3 here, you will of course have comment. You will of course have a commates, as you know, because aleph is a guttural, resh, aleph, ayin from chapter 1, day 1. You have compensative lengthening. Okay, if you oopsie. I wasn't supposed to do that. I saved it. No! and now it's saved forever. um, if, if you don't know that by now, you're really in trouble because it's going to go hard and fast. So go back to chapter 1 if you don't understand why you have compensative lengthening underneath the wow for the doubling, right? Just start over. And it's all right if you don't get it. It's okay. Just go back and do it. If you're watching the videos to learn this, you've got all the time in the world to learn this. Chapter 1 with the chart, ratio of ion, and then where does compensative lengthening come in with the definite article, right? I forget exactly what chapter that is, but it's after nouns, obviously, the definite article, okay? Now, he's got them here as irregular forms, and, you know, irregular is a loose term, but it's just trying to get after, they're apocated, they're missing letters. Well, apocated isn't right either, to be honest. Apocated means chopped off, and that's at the end. So you're going to have these variations, or whatever. So let's read it to you. Let me read it. Since the imperfect waw-consecutive forms are developed from preterite forms that were historically shorter than the imperfects, some irregular verbs show features characteristic of these short forms. It's like the real preterite kind of showing itself. And that's in my little silly introductory story. He got lost in this witchery, witchcraft, sorcery area, and his offspring were mangled forms of a pure form that used to be, right? So that's what's happening. So example 5. The accent is going to fall on the first syllable. There's no, I really can't even use paint to show this. It's just what happens. This is the form. The accent is going to show up on the first syllable. So instead of yeshev, when you want to tell the story, he dwelled, right? You say vayeshev. And it might do you well to actually pronounce out loud and get the accenting right. It helps. So you'll hear me say, now listen, it's vayakum. And you'll go, it doesn't sound right. And you'll go, oh, that's right. It's one of them short forms. That's a preterite. This is the something waw-consecutive, and it's whatever it's going to be from there, because that accent gives it away as an imperfect waw-consecutive. So yomar is going to be vayomer. And you'll notice that the slight change of vowels inside there. Don't let that bedazzle you into an incorrect reading. 2 consonant roots, hollow and third hey, will show a shortened form in the imperfect waw-consecutive. And again, without the suffixes, the a forms, right? So the hollow roots will lose that mater letter, and you'll get yakum will become vayakum. And notice this here. That is, and I'm going to see if I can make this larger for you. Yep. Just to get closer. Oh, that's too much. There. Excuse me. Let's undo that. That is, again, another chapter 1 thing. This is chapter 1, lesson 2, and that's the vowels. That is an unaccented syllable. We're used to it being on the last syllable, but when you see accommates in the last syllable and the accent is moved forward, that is not an A. That is an O. And that's important for this reason, because this O has a lot to do with that wow. Because remember, the wow is the mater lectionis, the mother of reading, the mater letter, for OU vowels, right? That's how you get your root. See, so how do you tell the difference? How do you tell whether vayakum is a hollow root or a third hey verb? Well, you have 2 clues. This one here, underneath the preform, is your commates, which says as loud as possible, I am a hollow root in the imperfect. And then you have this O vowel, which is really saying I'm a hollow root, and my hollowness is a mater letter wow. Okay? Notice in example 8 the same concept. This is a segol, and it's telling you that you have a yod as the hollow root. Okay? Now notice this note again. Remember how I've been stressing a little bit that in chapter 7, you're introduced to the concept of clues because you're losing letters and you need to look for the clue which letter you've lost. And about 80% of the time, you get a pretty clear clue. And when you don't get a clear clue, you have to guess and jiggle it until the thing fits, right? But this commates under the preform is super duper important. The moving of the accent is super duper important, right? So you've got some clues there to help you figure out what you're doing. Now here's the apocated form, and I have to admit, I just like saying apocated. Apocated, chopped off. So you have the same thing there, except you have a little bit of a feature, not a bug. It's a feature, and that is instead of vayiven, like this. Remember how way back when I introduced segolits, and I told you that segolits are one-syllable words pretending to be two-syllables? It's really milk, but they wanted to be two syllables just like all their friends, and so they pretended, and they were melik, but the accent stayed on the front end, so you actually knew you were saying king and not some other thing, melek, which would be a different word if it existed. It's the same thing here. You get vayivne. You chop off that last syllable, and you get vayivn, but it wants to be like all the other kids, and so it vayiven. See, it's still a monosyllable, but it's two syllables. We're just going to make believe. So it's just so they don't feel bad about themselves, right? We're all about empathy nowadays. And so with the third hay, apocated forms, it really is about sympathy. We want to be sympathetic. Yeah, I know this problem here. Example 10, for example. Example 10, the redundancy department. The Department of Redundancy Department, right? Yeah. Ya'ase is a third hay root, but it's got this guttural in the first position, and so you apocapate, you chop off the hay, and you get vayas, but the ayin won't take a silent schwa, right? And you don't need a silent schwa anymore because you're trying to make a two-syllable word out of a monosyllable, and so you get vayas. I am really a double syllable word. I want to be just like you. Now, this guy here, it looks like this syllable finally, we're at the very, this little paragraph. We're finally, okay, so I can ignore this. Don't ignore this because vayahi is what you see in the Old King James Version and some decent other translations, and it came to pass. Right? This is a major text marker for helping you understand that the story is moving forward. And so you see it repeatedly. It's in the Bible. What did I say? I forgot what I said. It's close to 1,000 times, I think. That can't be right. It's got to be like 10,000 times. I don't know. It's in there a lot. When you're trying to tell the story, you say vayahi. And I'll bore you with that later. I got this whole thing in my dissertation that I basically have to zip up and put into a, was it a 10,000 word document? I got to somehow distill it into a single footnote. But I could write you a 10,000 word paper on just vayahi. But that's the point is, don't ignore that because it's a super duper important thing, just for the sheer frequency of the occurrence of vayahi. And so it will do you well right now to actually memorize example 11. Yeah goes to vayahi. Why does it do that? It's one of those things like in any language where it's just, well, we've used it so many times that it's evolved to be a certain thing, and we all know what it is. It doesn't have a grammatical etymology. Evolution. It doesn't work that way. You can't get from A to C. There's no B. You understand? Unless you parachuted into say 1200 BC when the time of the judges was just getting started or whatever. I got my coffee just right today. Rejoice with me, brothers and sisters, should there be, but we're all sons of Christ, right? Sons of God in Christ. The perfect wow consecutive. Okay, it's not. I want to avoid something here. It's not sort of like, well, they just switch places when you're telling a story. You use the imperfect, which is the future tense, as the past tense, and you use the perfect, which is the past tense, as the future tense. It really isn't working like that. The perfect is going to be used as the future because of a thing called sequencing. Now put that one in your pipe and smoke it. And we'll pay special attention to perfect as we go forward from here, and I'll teach you as we go along. If you're taking a course with me, you're not going to get the wrong answer, just so you understand. Okay? Oh, this is going live anyway. I try to do this unlisted first so I don't make any mistakes. Holy moly, I hope I don't foul up and say something I shouldn't say, or something naughty even. What was I saying? Oh, yeah. If you're taking a course with me, don't fret. I won't mark it wrong because this is really advanced grammar, but I am going to try to move you forward to understanding something called sequencing, so that when you're taking an exegetical course, or you're actually trying to read the Bible, you're not flummoxed by seeing the wow consecutive perfect and going, man, is that the future tense? That's strange. Because it's not necessarily future tense. It's necessarily perfect wow consecutive. And what it actually is conveying is a little bit more complicated. Right. Yeah, see, so more diverse and complicated than the imperfect wow consecutive. So you can read that on your own. Buy the book, please. It's not. I'm not getting any money from it, but this is work that somebody else did. Okay, so the perfect plus the conjunction. How do you tell the difference? Well, you don't. It's a rule of thumb. If you see a perfect with a conjunction on it, it's the wow consecutive, and you have to make sense of it. If it doesn't make sense as a wow consecutive, then it's just the conjunction. And then you got to do some other work, because in order to tell the story, you use the imperfect wow consecutive. So why is it a perfect wow consecutive in just the simple past? See, so you got a lot of work to do. It's all right. This is the stuff that makes Hebrew fascinating and lovable. It's endearing. And he will kill. So while this is potentially problematic, it should be noted that context, right? And we're going to start learning a lot about context. If you have any kind of linguistic chops at all, you'll see that this Hebrew really does sort of answer the ideal of context-driven linguistic method. Like, you just can't make a rule about this language. It has to be sort of taken holistically and analyzed thus. And you have to be able to answer questions forward and backwards in order to make decisions about one particular point. Now, there are a couple of places where the Masoretes help us out. So, for example, when you see v'katalta, you've clearly got a conjunction, and you killed, with these consonantal endings, right? If it's the perfect wow consecutive, there's going to be an artificial shift of the accent, v'katalti, or v'katalta, right? And you will kill, consecutive, right? So there you go. Now, this chapter is mostly about concepts, not about morphology, although you did have the morphology of the short forms, right? So here's what I was talking about sequencing a little earlier, right? Past narrative sequences are going to be rooted to a perfect somewhere, and you may never see it. It might be a million miles away, right? But there's a perfect somewhere down the line. And then from there, you sequence it with wow consecutive imperfect, vayiktol, right? And so you have example 16. Shema hamelech el hanevi'im vayishmor eth ha-Torah. The king heard or listened to the prophets, and he kept the Torah. You're not going to see that sentence in the Bible, but that's a good example. Because kings never do that. Ka ra'u hanevi'im el hamelech vayishmor hamelech eth ha-Torah. The prophets proclaimed to the king, and the king kept the Torah. And here you have an example of the waw-consecutive being used to switch subjects. Ooh, stop. Often the initial perfect form is omitted. Like I said, it's somewhere way down the line. You might not even see it. Okay? And so you'll see this, vayikra'u, and you'll often see vayihi, starting a story. So see 1 Samuel verse 1, 1 verse 1. And there was a man, vayihi. The famous one that I'm working on, vayihi, Isaiah 7 verse 1. And it came to pass, the kings of the Samaria and Syria came and to attack the Jerusalem, but couldn't do the battle, vayihi, right? And you'll see vayihi, vayihi, vayihi is a storytelling thing. 3, here's the sequencing thing. If something intervenes between the initial wow and the verb form, then the wow consecutive is not used. What does that mean? Well, you'll see this frequently. It's sometimes parenthetical, but sometimes it's like an aside. So like this. Vayikra'u ha-nevi'im el ha-melech, v'lo shamar ha-melech eth ha-Torah. The prophets proclaimed to the king, and the king did not keep the Torah. Right? So you have this intervening, and it fouls up the sequence, and you got to start over again. It's a lot of work. Well, you'll get used to it, right? And by the way, we're about halfway through the learning curve, which is a sheer rock face in Hebrew. And then chapter 16 comes, and you're attacked by a monster at the top of the sheer rock face. And if you survive that, it's clear sailing, honest. It's just basically memorizing a handful of what do you call those things? Paradigms, and one easy concept after another. Well, here's how you do causation. Here's how you do. Passive voice, and so on and so forth. Piece of cake. We're about halfway through. This is sort of like when you look up at chapter 8, and you kind of look up and you go, "Holy moly, that's Mount Murderhorn," and it turns your head to no, that's Mount Murderhorn. No, oops, nope. That's where you are right now. Don't despair though. I'll give you all the equipment you need to get up those 3 peaks. Right? Future senses, perfect while consecutive, are used to indicate future statements, usually introduced by an initial verb form, imperfect. So that's I'm basically slowing you down, making you read it. You start with the imperfect, and then you follow it up with perfect while consecutive. The idea here isn't really to get you past and future. The idea is to get you to see sequences. That is in sequence, and they hook together. They're concatenated, and that has to be taken into account as you're translating, and more importantly, as you're interpreting and for application, because very few people are taking Hebrew at this level in order to become a translator. You're taking Hebrew to be an interpreter and applier, a teacher, right? Bringing it alive for your hearers. And here, my dear Christian brethren, we see the imperfect while consecutive attached to a verb which indicates the causality of God's grace. Don't do that. Okay, again, if something intervenes between the initial wow and the verb form, a negative low, something like that, then the wow consecutive cannot be used, and the future tense reverts back to this imperfect thing, right? Again, the sequence is broken, and you do it all the time, and you got to pick it up again, and that's a lot of work to figure this stuff out. So how are you going to translate the wow? And then a couple other things. You can read that on your own. Practice and context, right? So there you go. Summary of verbal aspects. So you have the perfect, you have the imperfect, and you have the wow consecutive, okay? And you have to indicate it on your quizzes. There you go. Here's the vocab, verbal roots. Haya. Live, to be alive. Oops, that's a chaya. L'chaim, to life, maybe? Is that right? Yarad, to go down, descend. You're starting to get directional words now. You have yarad, you have Allah, which is to go up, and you have yatsa, which is to go out. And bo technically is to go in, but bo gets stretched to mean to go. And also you have halak, to go back and forth and in and out and all that kind of stuff. But you've got a bunch of directional words now, up and down and in and out. Muth, to die, to be dead. Oh, you might see chaya and muth in the same sentence. And it's in our famous Lutheran psalm that Luther likes so much. I will narrate the works of the Lord. I will not die, but I will live and narrate the works of the Lord. What is that, Psalm 118? It's a stative verb, to be dead, and you see it as math instead of moth. Nasa, that's the one I told you about. Watch out for it and making the mistake with nasa, with the choking camel at the end. Nasa with the choking camel is a journey. Nasa is with the quiescing aleph is going to be to lift up, to bear, to carry, right? And it's a very frequently used verb. I will lift up my hands unto the Lord and stuff like that, right? Ana, to answer, respond honestly, find a mnemonic device to get these ions and these alephs distinct. A word to the fool. Zahav, gold. Cherev, sword. Yeled, child boy, so you're going to yalad a yeled, okay? You're not going to yarad a yeled. You're going to yalad a yeled, and you're not going to yalak a yeled either. Make sure you get all those things distinguished. Kesef, silver or money. Sabah. You may know from liturgy Yahweh Sabaoth, or the Lord Sabaoth, from if you do page 5 and 15 or Divine Service 3 in the Lutheran Service book. You're going to hear that song, Holy, 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 Lord God of Sabaoth. Right? This is it. It's translated often as host. I really wish that they would just translate it as army, because it makes it contextually. It really is about him being in charge of armies. And when you have hosts, you have like, well, white-clad angels with wings, cherubic and sort of pink cheeks and harps and stuff like that. And they're really like warriors ready to kill bad guys. When it's not a host, when it's not an army, then you can do the whole angelic cherubim thing, right? But I would stick with army. Others, lay more. It's an infinitive of Amar with a lamed, but what you got is quotation marks, right? And that's gonna foul you up at first. So you're gonna see somebody's gonna say Amar, lay more, and you're gonna go, why is he saying Amar twice? Vocab, lay more, recognize that's the quote. Bad news, they don't have a close quote in Hebrew. Po is here to be distinguished from peh with his mouth. Po. And then sham, not sam. Sham is there. Okay? Good enough. Hey, you've learned something big in Hebrew today, and that's how to tell a story. And it's not so hard. It's a new concept. You're going to have to practice it. But I sure hope you fall in love with it, as I sure have. Onward and upward. Let's go attack that murder horn and get over it. I'll see you next time.